Okay, let's get started. Let's begin. I'd like to wish everybody a very happy new year. Welcome to the Direct Sourcing Forum. This is our winter 2022 webinar. Great to see so many friends out there. I do want to extend a special welcome to our international guests joining from Canada today, Germany, India, Lithuania, Mexico, Netherlands, Romania, South Africa, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, and the United Kingdom. Before we get started here, I did want to let everybody know that we will be recording the webinar today, including chat. So don't write anything that you don't want other people to see later. So again, many thanks for joining. For those of you who haven't joined us before, we've created the Direct Sourcing Forum because we believe direct sourcing deserves its own stage and spotlight. Our mission here is to examine trends, best practices, and opportunities that are specific to direct sourcing. And we always try to do that in a way that's always relevant and informational, but never salesy. Throughout the year this year in 2022, we plan to guide buyers and stakeholders on the full life cycle journey from program planning through actual program go live. And we're going to start our yearly series today with solution design. Now, let's go ahead and meet our panelists. Let's start with Julie.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Nice to be here today. My name is Julie Simler. I'm with LiveHire. I've been in the staffing industry for over 20 years now, but the last 6 to 7 years have been in this direct sourcing space, working on technologies and helping customers implement managed direct sourcing programs. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Brian?
Hi, everybody. Great to meet those I've yet to have the opportunity to. My name is Brian Spour. I oversee TalentNet's customer success division, which includes our global portfolio of clients, but also the upfront solution design, and then continuous improvement to make sure what we've set up is operating and providing the value we hoped.
Thank you, Brian. Coop?
Sure. Hello, my name is David Cooper. I'm the president of Opptly. Like Julie, been in this space for 25, 30 plus years through MSP, VMS, staffing, and now direct sourcing. Opptly is a direct sourcing technology company. We provide both private and public marketplace talent communities powered by our proprietary AI. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Coop. Praneeth? Praneeth, you're on mute.
Okay, there goes my daughter. Hello, everyone. My name is Praneeth Patlola. I was the co-founder for WillHire, doing product engineering and DSP solutioning, being part of acquisition into Pro Unlimited. Now I do the same with a larger customer portfolio, with a larger size, an absolutely amazing team, where I still get to do some hacks on the product and solutioning to hack new solutions by creating talent pools.
Nice. Thanks, Praneeth. And my name is Brian McGuire. I lead sales at TalentBelt. We offer advisory services, helping customers with their business case, scope, requirements, vendor selection, and program optimization. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to be talking today about program design. And our first question today is for Coop. How do buyers know if direct sourcing is right for their organization?
Yep, it's a great question. I think one of the ways to look at it would be to look at where has it been right, and talk about some of those attributes and where we have seen success with direct sourcing. I would start with saying where we have deployed it, we've seen broad success across all industry verticals. We've seen it across all skill sets, all labor categories, in all locations. So it seems to have a very enterprise-wide applicability. With that said, though, I would say that there are some client attributes that tend to make direct sourcing more successful or more the right fit. A few of those, one, when you're building out a private talent marketplace, it's certainly leveraging strong brand advocacy. So where clients have strong branding, strong following, or advocacy towards their brand, certainly very helpful. I'd say secondly is where the client understands that the access to talent is business critical. A lot of times people ask, what are the drivers? And we'll probably talk about that here in a little bit, to doing direct sourcing. Again, understanding the access to talent is of critical importance to the business. Addition, looking at an innovative culture. This requires change management. It requires a different way of thinking. So clients that have innovative culture and are adaptive to new ways to sourcing talent is certainly key. Also looking at what I call technology and talent strategy alignment. When you're building out private marketplaces, you're integrated to client ATS, you're pulling in client known worker populations, you're integrating with a client career portal. So it's having a client that has the innovation and the culture to make these things available for direct sourcing. That really helps clients understand, hey, do we have these attributes? And does that help us understand, where and how and in what way we deploy both private and public marketplaces? What I will lastly say, kind of on the flip side, is some of the attributes where it doesn't work. I mean, direct sourcing fixes a lot of things, but one of the things we're finding that it doesn't fix is below market pay rates. You can certainly try to source resources on a lower cost basis, but if your pay rate isn't market rate, it really doesn't matter how you source them. So I would kind of give the contrast of what good looks like in our direct sourcing world.
Okay, that's great answer, Coop. Appreciate that. Our next question is for Praneeth. What do you see as the typical business case drivers for a direct sourcing program?
Great question, Brian. So before I answer that actual question, I also want to extend what Coop just mentioned in a different perspective too, because this question is also related to the previous question to which buyer or where does direct sourcing actually fit in. I think from a organization point of view, I think everything has to be driven by a goal. That's how naturally enterprises do work, and we all work, is what are we trying to get out of this? That's the most important aspect of it. For the sake of implementing direct sourcing from a trend point of view, I think it's a bit of a risk at this point in doing that. As Coop mentioned, what attributes do you have around your organization to drive, whether it's going to be rates, whether it's going to be cost savings as a goal, whether it's going to be talent pool. But I think the top three drivers, which at least we have seen in several implementations, and the top one most is cost. But it is getting debated every time, cost versus accessibility to the talent. And the third most important point is candidate experience, which is heavily overlooked as an industry in contingent world, where the candidate experience through the funnel of exercise of sourcing activity, where there is no control about the messaging, the language or enablement around the candidates, is kind of up in the air and a much of a gray area, where organizations are looking at like, what do you want to get achieved as? Do you want to deliver an amazing candidate experience, leveraging your employment? How do you do that? Those are the answers you'll discover through that business use case. Do you have access to a talent pool, whether it's going to be, let's say, a light industrial roles, where your roles are very much localized, and if you're able to build out in that particular local geography in 50 miles radius, a consistent engagement of a talent pool, leveraging and building an amazing candidate experience using a brand which is fairly in local, because that's repeated roles in nature, great. So that's direct access to that particular talent. And based on the current program structure, and we have seen some programs where we cannot promise within that program any cost savings, but the unfortunate nature of our business is many a times that is always a line item you have to check the box on. But we have to be careful about not compromising the delivery of sourcing activities or delivery, only chasing the cost saving score. But in today's world of where we are, with the great resignation and everything happening, I think cost is of a less issue right now. Access to talent, filling the role, reducing the cost of reducing the time to hire, which is going to be the much more important aspect, including the quality. So I'll stop there. That's a long chat.
No, that's a great answer. And let me ask the other panelists, would you generally agree with what Praneeth is saying here? Are you seeing similar business case drivers? Is there sort of unanimity here?
Yes, I think absolutely. I mean, it's definitely, again, going back to the first question, access to the talent, wrapping that around a candidate experience that is very, that aligns to the experience that candidate has as a consumer in other parts of their life. That's what people expect in their consumer life. That's what they should expect in their work life as well.
Yeah, and just to add to close on the thought, there are a couple of more add-on business drivers when it comes to talent acquisition as a business. When the organization is set up as an enterprise, where there's an active conversation between both sides of full-time and contract labor talent coming together. The vision the industry of talent always has for bringing the total talent side of it, but starting point of that becomes a business driver is, hey, we have this segment of talent pool already built in with an alumni pool here. Can we repurpose it for filling roles faster in any other form? And can we re-exchange or build an exchange-based centralized pool? That's another driver we have seen too.
No, that's great. Thank you, Praneeth. Our next question here is for Brian, and it somewhat relates to what we're talking about here. What metrics should be used to manage a program and measure ROI? What are you typically seeing in the programs that you're rolling out?
I think that's a really important question. And Brian, this topic builds on exactly what Coop and Praneeth started off with here. To measure what your ROI is for your organization, it's important to understand what value your program is providing to your organization, what goals have been set. Level setting on what the expectations are at the beginning of a program is critical for being able to measure it, because without clear guidelines and purpose for a direct sourcing program, you can measure 1,000 different things, but you don't know if that's really what the goal of the organization is aligned to provide. And I do think that the prevailing answer for this question 3 to 5 years ago would have been defaulted to cost savings. I think it's a really easy first step in the door in terms of measuring ROI. There's a clear number at the end of whatever your calculation is. There are many ways to get to a cost savings number, and we see across our clients, they all have their own flavor for understanding exactly how their programs are providing cost savings. But as we evolve in the direct sourcing space, and the wording that's come up a bunch of times here already is candidate experience. There are a lot of different ways that are less numerical to measure value in a program. I consider myself, I've been accused in the past of being a bit of a data junkie. So I've got, a breakdown in any given program about being, a quality metric versus a savings metric versus having a time or experience metric. So knowing which ones your program cares about or your client cares about going into the conversation certainly does help to frame that up. And I'll give some examples around quality metrics. Submission to hire ratio is one that I typically fall back on because it really does indicate, and you can look deeper into the submission to hire ratio to understand submission to interview and interview to selection ratios. But really what you're understanding there is the quality of the candidate entering your program through direct sourcing. Are they the ones that are going to be selected by the client? Do they end up being successful in gaining that approval of that hiring manager to be a viable candidate for that role? So quality certainly does matter. The quantity of output. So if we talk about the role of curation in the direct sourcing programs, measuring the quality of your partners in terms of their ability to output candidates at the right volume to fulfill the number of roles you're looking to place. Time metrics are relatively straightforward in terms of picking 2 consistent artifacts within your program to say, this is where we say that the process starts and this is where it finishes. So, a role being published versus a successful candidate being submitted, a lot of different options around that. But I think all in all, the system of metrics shouldn't be looked at as a single one data point to consider whether it's a successful program or not. Because without context, it's impossible to nail that down. And I think fulfillment ratio was one of the ones we in early days leaned on really heavily, but without all these other data inputs, the fulfillment ratio might not be telling you that full story.
Mm-hmm. Excellent answer. Does anybody have anything they want to add to Brian's answer?
Yes, great answer, Brian. And just to add on to that from an ROI point, I think the only advice or recommendation I always had, and through learning of the experience, is spread out the metrics with a time bound through the process. Don't expect like, oh, this 1 week we went live. What's an output? Let's get all the numbers checkbox here. That's not going to happen. So this investment of is more of a maturity curve model. So account for the maturity as an organization where you are, and what resources have you accommodated it for. And sometimes if you don't accommodate it for, you don't have enough resources allocated for the whole program success for direct sourcing, then you'll fall short of those metrics, and you're just going to, everybody's only looking at like, oh, we didn't hit our numbers this week, this month. But what you don't factor in is what activities that you have planned did not achieve, or what resources you didn't allocate, or what, for an example, if you had a seat population you never had. So what is the counter around that? So that's kind of very critical when you look at ROIs. That would be awesome to measure, but make sure that it's tied to a maturity model over a period of time.
Excellent follow-up, Praneeth. Appreciate that. Our next question is for Julie. What stakeholders should be involved in a direct sourcing program? What are you typically seeing?
Lots of different stakeholders during various phases of the program. But first of all, every stakeholder who's involved in an NDS program needs to take into account what was just discussed, because all of that is extraordinarily important. So, when building the business case, obviously we have our HR, talent acquisition, and procurement teams that are driving the decision about even implementing this program. But where we see the most success is when there is also engagement with the hiring managers. Whose pain are you trying to solve? And ideally, this core team is going to go with us in the MDS journey and become the biggest advocates for the program long-term, which will help with maturity and expansion over a period of time. During the implementation, after the business case is built, it's really about the marketing team from a branding standpoint, legal, and information technology, right? So we need some of those folks involved to help us, kind of do the hands-on work. But also, what another key stakeholder is the managed service program, your MSP or your PMO office. Whomever that team is, we need them involved at the program team level, but also at their leadership level. We need to make sure that we have buy-in from all of these parties once the decision has been made to move forward with a managed direct sourcing program, to make sure that everybody's aligned on goals, everybody's committed to success, and everybody is working towards a design and implementation to do so. So very critical. And then lastly, just echoing what the rest of the team talked about, what I would arguably say is the most important stakeholder is the candidate. When we're designing an experience for candidates, you need to make sure that that stakeholder is having a good experience with the program. So it's not how often you engage with a candidate, but engaging on topics that are relevant to them. And at LiveHire, we call these moments that matter. And these moments that matter is really important to that stakeholder group. So, just as an example, when you consider your most recent online purchase, the engagement that you welcomed was the confirmation of the order, the notification about delivery timelines, and the final delivery notification. What wasn't appreciated is before any of these other elements have been addressed, advertisement about other products, services associated with it, or kind of loosely tied selling of your data, right? This stakeholder group is critical to our success. And the philosophy should apply to the candidates. And so as you think about your stakeholder group, create a solution and an engagement model that will make the stakeholder group really engaged with your program. So those are the stakeholders that are going to typically be involved.
No, that's an excellent answer. Thank you very much. We have a question again for Brian. How should buyers define the scope of their program? Brian, you may be on mute.
How about now?
Perfect.
Great. Sorry about that. I think that's a really critical question to ask very early on in the process. The earlier you can understand your scope, the better off you'll be with all of the topics we've just covered today. And I think, it's kind of a chicken and an egg. The idea of goal setting and scope setting, they're coupled together without a doubt. And I think that you can pull certain categories of scope together. Things like, do you want to splice your program by geographical set? Is there a logical definition for the early pilot project that you're going to be launching, or do you want to go full scope from day one? So understanding what the intention is and how quickly you want to dive into being on a fully operating direct sourcing program. Praneeth also mentioned earlier the time series of what your goals are likely to evolve over time. Your year 1 goal versus your year 5 goal are likely to be very different. So keeping that in mind when setting up your scope discussion, look at your organization and understand what makes sense. Is there a specific set of roles that exist within a geography, within a business unit? Are there heavy users from a hiring manager population perspective that you can define that scope for your pilot and really get your key power users of your program on board to create internal advocates? Or back to the original topic, where can you achieve the highest amount of cost savings with the least amount of effort? There are a lot of different ways you can take a look at this topic and understand what value your business is looking to derive from your direct source program, and follow that, pull that thread, follow that thought process to understand, if I'm looking for the quickest impact, deepest impact to my organization, what are the first places I should be looking for that value?
Yeah, that's an excellent answer. Does anybody have anything that they want to add to Brian's response?
I can add a few there. And on a scoping of direct sourcing, it's sometimes in larger enterprises can be tricky, like geography, local expansion versus global, and within even the professional category in a particular region, just in US or anywhere, you still have to categorize the high volume versus low volume within the scope of what do you really want to address, what problems do you want to address based on your particular goal, and which has the higher impact around that program goal. And sometimes you actually would realize that, well, it may not actually create the larger impact. The second most important from an implementation scope point of view, which is heavily needs to be considered, is many a times at a later stages, you realize that your marketing team is not buying into this. And your legal team is not buying into this because they probably are talking about data privacy. And let's say you do consider the scope of the project within a global rollout. The data privacy challenges around EMEA and how you access the data, the diversity information, how it is presented to the curation group, what elements you need to consider to ask what kind of information. When the scopes stage is much larger, you could do amazing things from talent experience, but also enabling the program goals globally, locally, or even one site, one role even. But I think I would just start small because if it is too long, you would basically get lost.
Yeah, excellent add-on information, Praneeth. We appreciate that. Let's see, we have another question here. This is for Coop. What are the key components of a direct sourcing program? So if you stand back from 50,000-foot view, what are the sort of legs that support a program?
Yep. No, it's a great question, because I mean, direct sourcing itself has so many definitions, as do the components of direct sourcing, right? And often you'll hear in the market, someone going, "Hey, we're using our brand to attract talent. We're doing direct sourcing." I'm kind of like, well, maybe you might be doing a component of direct sourcing, but that doesn't mean you're doing the entirety of direct sourcing. So for us, we kind of simplify it into a 3-leg stool to encapsulate the components of direct sourcing. The first leg of that is technology. And within technology, you have a few things that make up the technology leg of the stool. One is certainly your private marketplace, utilizing the technology to leverage the brand, to integrate within the ATS, to integrate with the career portal, to pull in known worker populations. That is a technology solution that we would call a private marketplace. Still under technology, you have public marketplace. You have where you're accessing pre-vetted talent communities that aren't tied to your brand. So it really gives you two marketplaces within that tech solution. Third, within technology, you have a proprietary AI. So you have a built for purpose AI mechanism that is so critical for the matching of the candidates and the work, and so critical for the continual candidate engagement based on that accuracy. The last piece on the tech side are just the tech enablers, doing the automated campaigning, doing opt-ins, and doing continual candidate engagement. All that encapsulates just the technology side of direct sourcing. The second leg is what we call curation, and something you'll hear us all talk about, because sometimes folks think I have technology, I'm using my brand, I'm doing the whole thing. You're still working with humans, and you're working with humans to make one of the most important decisions in their life, and that's where they're going to work. And some of that still requires the human to human interaction, right? Each of our technology solutions are built to most quickly identify the best qualified candidates, tie that to your brand. But beyond that is still the curation service level of a human to human discussion. Do you want to go to work for this brand? Do you want to do this type of position? Do you want to do it at this type of rate? Do you want to do it for this type of assignment? And you see a lot of companies that are bouncing up saying we're curation companies, and it's more than just engaging with a candidate through technology. Also, I would say the curation piece differs by the sophistication of the skill set, right? If we are working in a blue collar work environment, there might be a lesser amount of human to human. Conversely, if we're working in a high end white collar population, you're going to need a lot of human to human. So curation would be the second leg. The third leg would be the employer of record, / agent of record, whether they're going to be, at least in the US, W-2 or an independent contractor. But it's ensuring that you have a compliance piece built into this workforce. It's ensuring the risk mitigation tied to that compliance. And then everything that we've all said is wrapping that all around the candidate experience, where there's a continuity in the handoff between these technologies and then these subsequent service providers, and making sure that's seamless to the worker. So in some, direct sourcing is far more than just leveraging your brand. That's a piece of it, but it's far more entailed encapsulating technology, curation, and employer of record or agent of record services.
That's a great answer, Coop. Many thanks for making a sort of complicated thing understandable.
Sure.
We have a question here for Julie, and it looks like we're getting a little bit more into the weeds on this one. What information is needed to design a direct sourcing program?
Yes, and talking about design in 4 minutes is a challenge for anybody. So, but I'm going to do it in 7 minutes and 30 seconds if all goes well. I make up my time elsewhere.
Oh.
So, okay. So first of all, you can see how things are building on each other. There are certain themes and there's certain elements that we've been discussing that are all going to play a role in the design of an MDS program. So first of all, the outcomes you're looking to achieve by implementing a direct sourcing program. Are you looking at cost? You're looking at quality? Those are things we've already chatted about. What is your success criteria and your KPIs? And taking a look at it over a period of time, that maturity model, that's something that's very important as well. But I think one thing that we haven't really talked about that's hugely important in designing a direct sourcing program is what are the elements of change management that we need to look at. This is often overlooked and arguably one of the most important factors that we need to address to have a successful MDS program, because this change management element is going to hit across all of the different design features. So let's talk about 5 different design features that we have. One is defining the scope of work. And when we look at that, what are we looking at? Is it historical data? It's future workforce planning? Is there any divestitures? Are there any acquisitions? Are we looking at a single local geography? Are we looking global in nature? Really, we need to define that scope of work. And then also, what kind of program is it? Are we looking at whole of business? Are we looking at a division, a specific population like alumni or silver medalists? As Coop mentioned, there's multiple flavors of MDS. I'm sure every panelist has our preference on what a true version could look like and what is the most valuable to our end clients, but still we need to take the clients on the journey here. And then also which roles and business units are best suited to get the quick wins. And if you're looking at cost savings, which one of those elements can scale the fastest? That's what we need to look at. So we need to define the scope of work and be very methodical in that as our step one. Step two is branding. We talked about what branding material and messaging is important when implementing and designing a direct sourcing program. But there's another element of branding, and it's more of that soft skill. So, for example, understanding how we represent your organization. The curators and the recruitment team are an extension of your team in a managed direct sourcing program. So it's really important that they understand how to convey to a client your values. Why should, a candidate, your values? Why should a candidate come work for your organization or be part of your private talent pool? So it's not necessarily always just about a logo. It's about a message and a culture that we need to infuse into designing the program as well. As we go into talent pools and job requisitions, when building talent pools, we need to understand, what talent pools need to be built, and then also the volume of candidates required for each of those pools. And we all have metrics and calculators that we can bring to the table to show you that. But then there's something else. When it comes to job descriptions, VMSs, vendor management systems, send information out to suppliers that then have to engage the candidates. What we need to do in designing job descriptions is take a job description that's meant for a vendor and turn it around and make it a candidate-facing job description. Again, infuse your branding into that job description. Make it really more relevant to that candidate and the role that they're going to be doing for you. So that's a really important piece of the work that needs to happen. And again, that falls on the curation team, and the technology enables it. Sourcing and delivery. Whew, that's a long one. Boy, I could talk for hours on this. First of all, when we talk about workforce planning, we talk about it typically from the lens of what is the workforce that we're trying to solve for the client? Where do we find those workers? How do we source those individuals? But we also need to think about that in the context of your curation team. If you're going to be filling 25 roles through your MDS program, or 200 roles, or 2,000 roles through your MDS program, we need to design a solution with your curation team that brings together enough team members to support that effort. So workforce planning with your curation team is a very important piece of the MDS design process. And then also from a sourcing perspective, we need to target those individuals who want to work with your brand. Now, given the importance of this particular design element, let me give you some things to consider. In LiveHire implementations and in most MDS implementations, the most immediate target for candidates are former applicants, right? Your alumni, your silver medalist, and again, those individuals have come to you directly. And then once we seed the talent pools of the talent community with those individuals, the second place the curators typically go to are job boards, right? That's kind of the easy hunting ground. But in this war on talent, we need to think creatively, and we need to design a sourcing solution that looks at other channels. So for example, populations of workers that you may or may not be considering: high school graduates, skilled youth, recent college grads. Are you looking at those populations as part of your MDS program? Internally, you probably are, but let's take a look at it through the lens of contingent labor or total talent. What are we doing with your MDS program with that population? What about veteran engagement or disabled workforce? Coops mentioned a public marketplace. Are you connected with organizations that have populations of those types of individuals that you can tap into? Mom Project, great organization. We need to be looking at those kind of individuals and those populations of workers. Here's one. Are you a second chance employer? One of the women who recently joined LiveHire, she was a recruiter and she was extremely successful with this population of talent. So are you willing to take a chance and give someone a second chance inside of your organization? What talent pools do they belong in? What jobs can they do? You know, your curation team needs to bring this creativity to the table. It's about grassroots engagement, not necessarily about Indeed, just Indeed anymore. And then lastly, the flow, the fifth one is the flow of information. How are requisitions created? What is the process for submitting candidates to the hiring managers? It's important to note that designing an MDS program is not just about configuring a technology. It's about redefining how work is currently done and the change management associated with it. For example, we all know butts and seats, the absolute most important metric, but how we get there is different in an MDS environment. Let me give you an example. In the past, the MSP and the PMO had to screen through lots and lots of candidates to get to the top 3 or 5 that they wanted to sit to the hiring manager. Why is that? Because they had 10 suppliers submitting 3 candidates each. Some of those suppliers would submit 1 good candidate and 2 not really such good candidates just to fill the SLA that's out there. And so we've created this problem for ourselves. We need MDS candidates being pushed directly from the MDS program to the hiring manager. Why do we do this? Because these MDS candidates, by the nature of the program, are going to be higher quality to start with. We're not looking to hit a traditional supplier SLA. We're looking to look into the community, find the candidates that are the best fit using the technology and submit them. And if you're finding there's a quality issue, it's not a failure of the program, but it's an adjustment that needs to happen with the curation team. And so all of these design elements need to be taken into account, and then using these and having a really great design is going to impact how the workflow is configured, how change management is managed, and how technology is put into place to support the organization. All right, where am I at, Brian?
No, you awesome answer. First of all, great detail. And the person who asked the question is continuing to pick on you. So there's a follow-up. What do we do if our information is unavailable or unreliable? How do we design from that?
Okay. So ideally, as we would love to look at historical patterns to set a baseline and compare that against future forecasts. But if you don't have that information, that's okay. We can start with any data that you have. And in cases where data is difficult to produce or it's unreliable, our recommendation is let's meet with the hiring managers. Whose problem are you trying to solve? This is actually a great step for any MDS program, but in this particular case, it's important. Let's meet with them, understand what the challenge is, and then we'll implement a program kind of smaller in scope. But what we'd also recommend is that all of the requisitions be processed through the MDS program. Now, not all fulfillment is going to happen through the MDS program, but by taking this approach, we can start to analyze the volume of requisitions, the types of requisitions. We can evaluate the efficacy of those requisitions for an MDS program. And after 6 months, we can really start to use the embedded analytics and the other data to enable us to refine what your MDS program should look like. And that way we can start the talent pipeline, talent pool for future needs.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great answer again. Great best practice as well to solve a difficult situation. So yes, thank you very much. We have a question here for Coop. Should buyers involve their MSP, VMS provider, or staffing suppliers in the solution design process?
Yeah, there are 2 key words in that question: solution design. And yes, and I'll hit on that in a moment. The words you don't see in there is whether or not to do direct sourcing. Should the MSP or VMS have a play in that? Our experience has shown us there are some VMSs that have readily adopted to direct sourcing, have great API strategy. There are some MSPs also that have readily adopted it, and some that haven't. So it's a keynote to put in there the difference between, do I have my MSP and VMS decide if I do this, or do I have them involved in the solution design? As it relates to solution design, if you're a company and you have a VMS, you have made an investment in time, money, people, et cetera, to build out a system of record for your contingent workforce. So if you are going to bring in a direct sourcing solution, I would say yes, your VMS and your direct sourcing provider should work in coordination to ensure the API capability, to ensure the workflow capability for the continuity of the system of record. Exact same if you're doing on the FTE side, right? From an ATS system, you should look at having some process flow integration there as well. As it relates to an MSP, if you have a VMS, you likely either have an MSP or you have a project management office or a vendor management office, an internal group that is serving as that MSP. The same answer applies. You've installed a VMS, you've installed a process management office to manage the processes within that VMS. And yes, your direct sourcing provider and your MSP, or who's acting as your MSP, should work on ensuring the process continuity. So I would say yes, engage them in the solution design because they're already an integral part in your non-employee workforce. And the exact same on the TA side when you're looking at FTE hiring.
Nice. Great answer, Coop. Thank you. Does anybody have anything they want to add to Coop's response?
I would love to add the concept here that, and Coop definitely brought that up, that these people are an integral part of your program already. These different roles in the process of administrating any contingent labor program include your MSP or your PMO, your VMS. They're already operating in some capacity to facilitate the program, and that extends through direct sourcing. So having them say, if the intent is to do direct sourcing, to Coop's point, might not be the right place to have that conversation. But once the determination is there's value for the organization and this is what we want to achieve through direct sourcing, bringing all partners to the table to gain joint commitment on how it's going to be administered, how it's going to be facilitated, and having those partners buy in and commit to their role in executing direct sourcing surely is a benefit up front. If you have clear expectations of who's going to be doing what, if it's as simple as who's going to be clicking which button. Julie brought up the fact that direct sourcing candidates, best practice to send them directly to the hiring manager to guarantee that the quality onus is on the curator. That MSP still needs to click that button to shortlist that candidate to get them in front of the hiring manager. So there's an entire system of roles that are going to be contributing to fulfillment through direct sourcing. And it would be great to get them up front and bought in as soon as possible once you've decided that this is a strategy you want to deploy.
No, great follow-up. Anybody else have anything to add? Okay. Looks like, Praneeth, we have a question for you. Do buyers need to have a VMS in order to implement a direct sourcing program? And if they don't have a VMS, what are the workarounds?
That's a super interesting question because it's pretty tricky. I think from a program size, if you look at the reality of this, VMSs are focused on vendor management, compliance, billing, requisition, to the flow, to invoicing, everything around that process, but it's not talent. So if an organization is using a VMS, it's of a great advantage because you already have a maturity model put into your program, and connecting those through integrations and the workflows and everything else becomes easy in the program to extend your existing mature model into a direct sourcing model. But that also said, that's not a mandate to have a VMS. Irrespective of a VMS, you can still do it, but be prepared to have a lot more noise, to be having a lot more challenges around managing the workflow. If an organization is already doing this without a VMS, the bigger question to ask is, why aren't you using a VMS? Is it the size of your program not enough? Is it too small of a size that you only have a few transactions in the whole year to even use a VMS, which is why you're using an alternative system of record to actually do any of your billing? If that's the case, then you probably want to answer that question before even answering direct sourcing question. If you have a larger talent problem or access to talent for the contingent labor and address that, that's where the direct sourcing solution actually would fit in, irrespective of VMS. We have seen customers use success factors, as also success factors does have enablements around using some workflows around contingent too. So enabling that as an extension, including your full-time, is also another option. Or few customers also have used ServiceNow workflows to in the same degree, but not at the same complexity level that you can actually achieve with VMS, because it will ease up too many things in the program management. So in order to achieve a direct sourcing, it's not relevant or even needed from attraction, curation, and engagement of a talent. But at the end of the day, in the program management of an overall, to reach your ultimate goal, I think you would need a combination of the both for a greater success. But independently, can direct sourcing exist and be highly successful to find talent and engage talent and curate talent? Totally. That has no dependency on the VMS.
Yep.
Great answer. Does anybody have anything they want to add to that?
Maybe the one piece just to add, Praneeth's hitting on some of that, is the VMS, right? It ties to the non-employee workforce procurement part of the question, right? So certainly on the FTE side, it's not in the process and clearly not a needed component. It's probably worth pointing out to just as Praneeth is doing, because it's not relevant on the other side of the hiring equation.
Yeah, and just something, if you are around in the HR tech space and HR arenas too, direct sourcing is a keyword. I call it as a keyword because it is a keyword in other parts of the world. Is how do you directly source candidate? And it's a technique which has been practiced in HR world for quite some time. So where the combination of those tools is an applicant tracking system with a closely knitted an onboarding and CRM system, a talent CRM system, which is where there is an overlap between the contingent and full-time. So when you're doing a program design, and if you're looking at your original landscape of tools that you're already using with or without a VMS, you still want to consider on a long-term planning, do you have a talent CRM which actually can address both sides of it? But many a times you'll see that the existing CRMs and ATS won't heavily address the contingent side, but the newer CRMs which are being bought of the direct sourcing fairly can address both sides of it.
Great answers, guys. Appreciate it. We have a question here for Brian. How do buyers know if they should outsource curation?
Very important question. Very important question. I think it resonates for a lot of program owners. Historically, you have a VMS system, and that requires an MSP or a PMO team to operate it. And I think the group on the call here, being technologists, can also agree our intention isn't to replace the human element in this process entirely, rather gain efficiencies. So the operators of the talent technologies of these groups on the phone here, that curation team plays a key component. One of the things we touched on, scope, size, intention, purpose of your program. Given the global audience that we have on this call, I think maybe it's important to start there. A true global implementation of direct sourcing is more so in reality a culmination of regional deployments. And a major factor in that is that the labor laws, data privacy, compliance issues in different parts of the world are so unique. There's been an effort to, more uniformly apply GDPR in Europe, but the reality is it's more like GDPR plus in each region because each country has their own little flavor around it. And to bring it to the conversation around curation, the same thing applies in each of these regions. You need somebody in location where you're recruiting that understands that local market. And that can be someone internal to your organization, or it can be a company who specializes in recruiting in that market. What it really comes down to in terms of effectively managing that at scale is a proper governance model. And we've seen it clients that have regional partners globally, from Singapore to the Pacific Coast in North America. they have a clear governance model to make sure everybody's on the same page. There's regular reviews of operational models, technology enablement, all of those things that are happening uniformly, but it's being governed at a global level. And one of the main considerations when you're choosing a direct source partner or choosing to set a team up internally is the cost and the investment that it takes to properly scale a team to meet the goals that you have set for yourself and your program. I think we're fortunate there are some recruitment constants that help us calculate what you can expect out of a team in terms of the expected output of submissions of any given individual. One person only has so many hours in the week. And even through gained efficiency, there's a pretty consistent measure of how many submissions one person can make in a week. And if you juxtapose that against your submission to hire ratio as a program, you can see how many people you're going to need to be able to fulfill a certain number of roles and couple that against your goal. So I think there are a lot of considerations when deciding whether you in-house or outsource your curation. I think that the prevailing theme for me, though, is that it's important to scale the size of the team to match the goals that you have for your program. And if that's a cost that your organization is able to bear, and not only a cost of the individual recruiters or curators, but also the governance model. Who's going to manage those people day to day? Who's going to do the data and reporting? If you can lean on and leverage a partner who's doing that at scale already, and they can dedicate a team, and because a big part of effective curation best practices, having a dedicated team allocated to your program uniquely. If you can leverage a partner who has more of an ability to scale rather than bear that cost as an organization, and that fits your purposes better, then that might be the better option for you. But we've seen both scenarios be extremely effective. Some of our most effective programs are actually in-house curation, but we find there tends to be a greater scale and more flexibility and a great partnership when you take that outsourced curation and leverage them to create that talent asset and really adopt them as part of your internal strategy.
Great answer, great detail. Does anybody have anything they want to add?
I think some it's like what Brian said. I think I used to sell MSP and VMS. A VMS is a race car, but it still needs a driver, right? And that's the MSP. It's the same with direct sourcing tech, right? It's a race car, but somebody has to drive it. And I think it's all the things Brian said, and you tie it as well to the
Praneeth, I think you had a comment.
It's much more easier decision sometimes because you have to look into your own organization first. Do you have the capability for delivering and achieving your goal that you set for direct sourcing, which is going part of your scope and design of the direct sourcing tool? If you do not have that capability, there are several ways typically we solve a problem of that capability exercise, whether it's going to be contracting a piece of that, whether it's going to be outsourcing a piece of that, or whether it's going to be enabling that part of your existing ecosystem through your existing partners or supply chain. Do you really can do that? Who understand your program? Because for somebody new to come in and understand your program, execute, it also is a challenge. So given your execution model of your ultimate goal of a long-term versus short-term, you can always flip that model multiple ways and have flexibility. My recommendation is to have contractual flexibility around individual partnerships that you're building within this program, so that if you need to and build any future experience and expertise where you do have a combination of that merged into HR side of talent acquisition, you can actually in-house this out only when you reach that maturity goal.
Okay, yeah. Excellent addition. I appreciate the comments, Praneeth. Praneeth, we do have a question for you here too, and we probably have time for maybe one more here. What realistic goals should a buyer set for a new program?
That's a very tough question. I think it's totally depends on your goals of the program. Again, depends on your goals of your organization. Are you solving for faster access to talent through this? Do you have the capacity to solve for it internally, externally around that? Or are you going to solve it using a partner who actually brings in the advisory, consultative, and execution expertise in executing that? If you're working with a partner, your program realistic goals probably spread across from scope, discovery, implementation, and go to market in addressing one target category, and build out several metrics like Brian mentioned, a list of all the metrics and KPIs which are out there. And most of the direct sourcing programs, if you correlate, if you're using a market player, they would definitely come with a list of KPIs and metrics already come to you. Then you say, here is what we do. From a reality check goal, I think it's like super important from the program goals to understand, do you really have the buy-ins? I can't stress enough around that, because many a times we run into implementing a program and then you realize like, oh, I don't have my legal buy-in, or I don't have my marketing buy-in to use a brand in a certain way on a social media that I wanted to use, which I designed in the program. So your goals are correlated when you're, especially in an early stage, fairly towards minimalistic in saying, did you actually check the box in launching it successfully? Have a goal of launching it successfully, measuring it at a minimalistic fashion before achieving a scale would be like a realistic goal. Your goals would be like really minimal. Did you get your brand approval initially? And then with that brand, create any impact of it, which means, did you attract enough talent? Did you design the talent acquisition process of attraction? If you didn't, there is the realistic goal, there is zero, which means all you did was connect your career and you're relying on organic talent. If you don't have budgeted for how do I attract my talent, how do I engage my talent on an ongoing basis, and what is your principle behind growing your talent pool? Have you accommodated for tier 0 goal, or are you asking everything to compete? So those define the realistic goals around it. As I said, it's a tough question. There is no single answer to it. When you dissect a program and scope it out, that's when you actually arrive to an actual realistic goals answer. And internally or through a partner, you can assess those real goals.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Excellent answer again. Does anybody have anything they want to add? Just a quick time check too. We're down to about 3 minutes, but certainly we'll take additional comments from panelists here.
I just think that everybody's talked about one critical element that we need to go back to. It's proper design, proper expectations, and change management. You get all of those together, then you can define everything and create a really great program that meets your objectives. So back to design.
Yeah, great wrap up comment. Anybody else?
I think one thing I'll leave a comment here for any program owner to really, being a champion of the direct sourcing program internally at your organization gives you the opportunity to influence the success of your program. The more adoption of best practices and your ability to champion and evangelize the program will set it up for success, regardless of what that goal, that number is, whatever the intent is. You do have the ability to influence.
Thanks, Brian. Yep. So I do want to take a minute to thank all of our panelists for their excellent responses and input here. I also want to thank our audience, for spending part of their day with us here. If we didn't get to your questions, apologies. We can certainly answer those for you offline, or even make them part of a future webinar. We do capture chat, like I said. So we're happy to get back to you either offline, probably both. If it's a great question, and I'm sure it will be, we'll discuss it in a future forum. Just to remind everybody too, the Direct Sourcing Forum is a quarterly webinar, and we do plan to meet again on Tuesday, April 19th, 11 a.m. Eastern as well. And next time around, we're going to be discussing vendor selection, service agreements, SLAs. So again, that's Tuesday, April 19th, 11 a.m. Eastern. So go ahead and save the date now. And then finally, you'll all receive a survey after this webinar ends. We would very much appreciate it if you'd take a few minutes to let us know how we did. And of course, include any questions that you have for us or for our panelists. And with that, I want to wish you all great health and success in 2022. Thank you for joining us.
Brian, panelists, thank you.
Thanks everyone.
Brian. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, attendees.